Ancient Egypt lasted for a long time. Over the course of 3,000 years, some 32 dynasties ruled over the lands along the Nile, building temples and pyramids, creating art, evolving complex belief systems and rituals, and generally just being better than everyone else in the world at just about everything during that time. But all good things must come to an end. Towards the turn of the first millennium AD, Rome was on the rise. First millennium AD, story all around the Mediterranean. It wouldn't be long before Egyptian domination came to an end, but the story of what happened next for Egypt has often been overlooked. Welcome to Nutty History. Today we're exploring the untold story of Roman Egypt. Viewer discretion is advised for this video, as some of this video may be offensive or disturbing. We, the makers of this video, in no way support or condone the actions of the subjects featured. When Cleopatra rose to power in 51 BC, she inherited a mess from her father, Ptolemy XII. The Egyptian economy was in the toilet. Corruption plagued governmental administration, which oftentimes financially exploited the people through unfair taxation. For years, to curry favor with their subjects, new rulers who came to power would forgive all debts owed, and then later create new predatory policies in a vicious cycle that eventually put Egypt's finances in ruin. Cleopatra was smart, leading her to build a great nation, have many conquests, and to be known throughout the world. She had studied in the world's greatest storehouses of knowledge at the time, the famed Library of Alexandria. She knew 9 languages, including Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Syrian, Median, Parthian, Latin, and Troglodyte, in addition to her native Koine Greek. Her ability to seduce and negotiate and use diplomacy to her advantage made her one of the most compelling rulers in all of history. It helped her lift Egypt back up through alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, both of whom she used her charms on. Charms that eventually led to statues being built of her in Rome comparing her to the god Isis. But by 30 BC, Cleopatra was facing a grim reality. Octavian, who helped trigger the fall of the Roman Republic and would soon become Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, had his sights set on Egypt. Her lover and father to 3 of her children, Mark Antony, was dead. Their combined naval forces had been defeated by Octavian's Roman fleet. Octavian had taken Alexandria and had Cleopatra locked away. Before she could be taken to Rome and humiliated in a processional march akin to Cersei's Walk of Shame in Game of Thrones, Cleopatra took her own life via snake venom. Mighty Egypt was no more. It became a Roman puppet state. Its name was Latinized to Egyptus, and big changes were on the way along the Nile. But let's rewind. You can say that ancient Egypt really stopped being ancient Egypt after it was conquered by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. After that, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled the land for 300 years until Cleopatra's death. In this sense, Cleopatra came from a long line of Egyptian pharaohs who were not actually Egyptian, but rather Macedonian Greek. During the Ptolemaic dynasty, Egypt became Greco-fied in a lot of ways. Greek philosophy and the arts started permeating through Egyptian society. A complex, highly stratified social hierarchy also developed to help the Greek pharaohs maintain power over the people. Religion became a mixture of Egyptian and Greek beliefs. The first Ptolemaic pharaoh, Ptolemy I Soter, even said, "Hey, let's make a new god," and smashed together the Egyptian gods Osiris and Apis, Dionysus and Helios to create Serapes. Temples dedicated to Serapes began going up all around Egypt, and the cult of Serapes was born. Under Roman control, Egypt became an even more diverse place. Jews had immigrated to the region during Ptolemaic times and set up lots of communities along the Nile. By 200 AD, Alexandria had become a Christian hub. In 313, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which gave Christians legal protections against persecution. By 380, Christianity was the official Roman religion, and the pagan syncretism, or merging of different religious beliefs, began to wane. These were the very early days of Christianity, when everyone was still trying to figure out what the rules were. One of the very early churches was the Coptic Church, with roots going back to the 1st century AD. The Romans brought an efficient, typically Roman administrative system to Egypt while it was under their control. However, many of the laws that the Romans passed ended up disbenefiting over the native Egyptians. Society became more hierarchical as land use policies promoted privatization, and a feudal system emerged, where all the wealthy people ate up all the land and forced the poorer people to work it for very little pay. This created resentment, and as a result, many Egyptians began finding comfort in the Coptic Church. The church gained such a following that the era from the 3rd to 4th centuries AD became known as the Coptic period. Things in Roman Egypt began to deteriorate further after the Council of Chalcedon, a meeting of 500 bishops of the newly established Chalcedonian Church in modern-day Istanbul in 451. During the meeting, they decided that a lot of the things were heretical, as it often goes with religion. Most of the heresy revolved around whether Jesus was both divine and human. The council decided that anyone who thought Jesus was only divine and not human was horribly wrong. Any Christians who didn't fall in line with the new rules were persecuted. By 600 AD, things had gotten so bad for certain Christians that even Persian and Arab rule seemed better than what they had. By this point, Rome was dying. It had already split into the Eastern and Western Roman empires back in 286 AD, and by the end of the 5th century, Western Rome had been snuffed out entirely by invading Germanic tribes and internal turmoil. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire by this point, had its capital in Constantinople, now modern-day Istanbul. The growing might of the Persians and the Arabs in the east was threatening to topple what was left of the once mighty Roman Empire. Around 618, the Sasanian Persian armies marched on Egypt. The Persians had already taken back a lot of territory from the Romans around what's now Syria, Palestine, and northeast Turkey, capitalizing on internal disarray within the Byzantine Empire. Not much is known about the actual invasion of Egypt, but the Persians managed to sack Alexandria pretty easily. Remember, there were lots of unhappy people. The Persians ended up staying in Egypt for only 10 years, with the Persian general Shahrbaraz running the show. In 629, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius made an agreement with Shahrbaraz to help him usurp the Persian throne if he left Egypt, which he did. The Persians left, and for a brief moment, Egypt was back in Roman control. It didn't last very long, though. In 639, the Arabs invaded. After the death of the Muslim prophet Muhammad, the Rashidun Caliphate came to power and had their sights set on conquering as much of the Arabian Peninsula and northern Africa as possible. By 634, the Caliph Umar had come to power, and the Rashiduns had exploded across the peninsula, conquering the Persians and a lot of the Byzantine Empire. Between 639 and 636, the Muslim army, led by the general Amir ibn al-Az, conquered Egypt. They tore through the Egyptian cities of Pelusium and Belbase and laid siege to Babylon, near Cairo. It was a long, drawn-out siege, but eventually the Emir's army was victorious. The Muslim army then marched on Alexandria. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius had managed to muster up a pretty good defense, but then got sick and died, and what was left of Roman morale quickly vanished. Egypt was under Roman rule no more. The Rashiduns moved the capital from Alexandria to Fustat, or modern-day Cairo. The Rashidun Caliphate still let Christians and Jews practice their faith. However, if they did, they needed to pay a tax called a jizya. Umar instituted a series of reforms across the country. New churches couldn't be built, but the ones that were already there could stay. Crosses were banned. Public displays of any non-Muslim faith were prohibited. Non-Muslim houses couldn't be taller than Muslim houses, and non-Muslims had to wear different types of clothing to identify themselves, among many other rules. The Muslim reorganization of society was nothing new to the Egyptians. When the Romans took control 600 years earlier, they instituted their own types of reforms. Egypt had always had a kind of cult worship of its pharaohs, who were considered divine in their own right. When Caesar Augustus took control of Egypt after Cleopatra's suicide, he created his own Roman imperial cult. Images of Augustus became synonymous with the image of Zeus. Temples were built to worship the deified Augustus and the Roman emperors that came after him. There are conflicting accounts of just how much Augustus didn't like Egyptian culture and religion. A lot of the historians at the time had very strong opinions against Egypt. They thought the gods the Egyptians worshipped and the structure of their society in general was inferior to their own great Roman society. This included the historian Cassius Dio, who wrote one of the only detailed accounts of Augustus and his policies in Egypt. Dio painted Augustus as pretty contemptuous towards Egypt, but in fact, the emperor saw Egypt as a valuable Roman territory. Maybe he hated Egyptian culture and their strange gods. Maybe he didn't. But he was pragmatic and saw how useful it would be to get into the psyche of the Egyptian people by building temples and associating himself with the gods in the same way that the Egyptian pharaohs had. Ancient Egypt, in all its glory, with all its incredible accomplishments and longevity, couldn't last forever. Nothing ever does. It was transformed under Roman control, for better or worse. History marches on. Do you have any more amazing facts to share about the Roman-Egyptian Empire? Share them with us in the comments, and do share and like the video. Thanks for watching yet another Nutty History video.